finding meaning in life, in purpose, in wisdom. There are even so many books. If you look at some of the bestseller books, a lot of them have to do with these kind of things. Self-transcendence, how to be a stoic, I don't know, all of these things, how to have a meaningful life, how to find your purpose. It seems like there is a strong interest in these kind of things, even for people who don't have religion, but even for religious people. They're finding, okay, how can I change my life for spirituality? There's so much interest in mindfulness, in meditation. Even academically, in psychology and cognitive science, there's so much work being done on wisdom. You would not believe it. I mean, unless you're working on it, which you'd probably believe it. Things that previously would read, for example, in the hadith by Imam Qasim about hikmah, some of its details are now being studied in cognitive science. So many researchers are focusing on wisdom. So there seems to be a very strong rise in interest in these things. And at the same time, even things like psychedelics, both academically and in the public, you know, even the medical healthcares, we see that right now they're using psychedelics to deal with, for example, treatment-resistant addictions. Many people who cannot quit their addictions through the use of psychedelics, of course, in a professional medical setting, they have been helped. Even dealing with trauma, the rate of healing PTSD increases from 20% to 80% with the use of psychedelics. So you see that there is a all-round interest in figuring out solutions to live better, a more meaningful life, that can be found not just in the everyday aspect of life. It seems that humanity is thirsty to go deeper than this whole routine of job, promotion, study, like houses, cars, etc. It seems like people want to go deeper. And at the same time that this is happening, we see another side to this, which is what a lot of scholars are now calling the mental health crisis. Suicide rates are higher than they've ever been. They're spiking. There's a lot of expressions of frustration, cynicism, futility. There's a kind of lost sense of touch with reality. A lot of people feel like their life doesn't make sense. They don't know what they should be doing in this world. Why am I here? What should I do? There's all sorts of books written on convincing people to stay alive. One of the books I picked up by one of the great authors, Matt Haig, a few years ago, Reasons to Stay Alive. Imagine an organism, a living organism whose goal is to remain alive, continue its life and survive, has reached a place where it's asking, why should I live? Even though everything in our body is designed to sustain its life. But still, we've reached a place that a lot of people, they don't know why they should live. Why should I continue life in this world full of pain, full of suffering, full of loneliness, full of isolation? And some of you may think that, okay, this is for non-religious people. This is for people with low faith, with weak iman. If you have iman, if you have a good relationship with God, you know what you're doing here. You won't be depressed. Someone may say that. But unfortunately, that's not the case. In fact, recently, an article was published by a great team of Muslim psychologists, I think headed by Dr. Rania Awad in America. They published it in the Journal of American Medical Association. And it showed that the rate of attempted suicide in the adult Muslims was twice as higher than other faiths and people of no faith. And I'm not saying that we know the answers why this is the case. There needs to be much more studies. Even Islamophobia could have a role in that. There may be so many reasons. But it is definitely a wake-up call when you hear attempted suicide rate is twice as higher than any other faith group or even people of no faith And in the Muslims, that is the situation. So this whole idea that this meaning crisis, this sense of darkness, this sense of isolation from the world, this loss of touch with reality can only be solved through faith, at least not the faith we have right now. And now you may be saying, okay, maybe those Muslims were not religious, but I actually went through the article with a lot of attention. Most of the people who participated in that study considered religion to be a very important part of their life. So it's not like they were even indifferent to religion, or they didn't care enough, or maybe they weren't religious enough. No, they were super religious, at least a great number of them, but still they had all the problems they had. So what's happening? So inshallah, in this series, I want to talk about this. What happened to us? Why are so many of us suffering, and why is religion not helping? At least if it's not making things worse, it's not helping either. And so I'm hoping that during the series we can learn what happened to us, how we got stuck in the surface of religion and we lost a lot of its depth. And this was the thing that caused us all the problems we have, how we're not benefiting from so much gems and wisdom that religion can play in our life. Please recite the salawat. Okay, let me tell you about another study, because I want to use that study as an introduction to speak about a hadith by Imam Ali alayhi salam. There was another study done a few years ago that has nothing to do with Muslim communities. It was about a native tribe in a different country, okay? Now, they realized that the suicide rate in that native tribe is very little, close to zero. And that was quite a shock, because the close vicinity of that native tribe, the people who were living in the urban places and the cities, they had quite the normal rate of suicide, which is obviously more than zero. And it was very interesting, how come it's zero here? And then the research continued focusing on this tribe, and after a while, what happened is that some of these native tribes who had these isolated lives joined together. So maybe 4 or 5 tribes joined together and started living together. And the interesting thing was that as soon as that happened, their suicide rates went not the same as cities, even higher than that. So from zero, as soon as they joined other tribes, they went even higher than other places. Now, one of the things that Chandler, one of the lead researchers on this study, pointed out was that one of the things they lost once they left that isolated community and became part of a larger whole was the narrative that made their life make sense. Okay? Previously, they had stories that were being transferred from one generation to another generation, you know? They all had a shared identity in their small tribe. And their life made sense. They had a past, you know, this is where our ancestors came from. This is what our ancestors do, the difficulties they had to go through for us to have this life. And they had an image of where to go. And this is a future that we're going to create for our children. They had a narrative within which their life made sense, the story. But as soon as they joined the other tribes, then it was no longer that they could benefit from that narrative, because now they were next to people from another tribe with a different narrative, with a different story, with a different background, with a different identity. So slowly, because they didn't have a shared version of a shared story to make sense of what the hell they're doing in this world, slowly they lost it, and their present moment becomes disconnected from a future and the past, which is also the case for many immigrants, because they're uprooted from the place in which their families lived for many years, where they have stories, where the buildings, the streets have all stories of what their ancestors did. So they're disconnected from the past, and they're in a place in which it's very difficult for them now to imagine a future based on all these different changes and all the changes which are happening so rapidly. And this meant that their present moments could not be understood. They couldn't make sense of their life at that moment. And this was the reason why their suicide rates jumped off the roof. Now, why did I mention this story? As breaking, as heartbreaking as it is, as sad as it is, as shocking as it is, how is it relevant to us? I want to say that the thing which happened to that tribe on a smaller scale, of not knowing what was their past, of not knowing what's their future, just being stuck in this present moment, which can be filled with pain, with isolation, with heartbreak, with illnesses, with nothing to look forward to, the same thing that happened to them on a larger scale, it's happening to the whole of humanity. Humanity as a whole has lost a narrative that can sustain its life, that can give it meaning, that you can use to make sense. Now, a lot of you may right now say, hang on a second, what we have, Muslims have, religious people have, we have a story. We were created by God, and then, in the whole story of Adam ate the apple, and then that happened, and so that's our past, this is our present, and our future is heaven, right? You may say, we have a story, we have a narrative, and we're here in this world to be tested. This world is a test. See, I just gave you a narrative, it makes sense. But the problem with this narrative is that, as evidence shows us, as our own lives show us, it's no longer working. It's in our head, but it's not in our heart. And that's why many of us, as soon as we go through a very difficult time, the narrative is not strong enough to sustain us through those difficult times. It doesn't carry us because it's just in our head, right? You know that whole beautiful line that's attributed to Imam Ali alayhi salam, Rahmallah imra'an arafa min ayn fi ayn wa ila ayn. Blessed be the person who knows their past, where they are right now, and where they're going. Which is exactly the solution we need for the meaning crisis. It's exactly what that tribe lost, and suddenly their life stopped making sense. We need to know, we need to live within a narrative that makes sense. Make sense of what was our past. Where did we come from? What are we doing here? Honestly, have you thought about it? What are we doing here? We just grow up, have children, cry in pain. We have heartbreaks, work for money, your boss gets mad at you, go back to work again, we'll look for weekends, and then weekend comes, you have to do laundry, it's just so boring, full of pain. What's the point of all of this? And then where are we going? Well, you're going to heaven or hell and all of that. But you're seeing that increasingly, even though we believe in this narrative in our mind, it doesn't do anything in our heart because we haven't managed to pass this narrative to the next generation in a way that they can live it. It's not livable. Now, a lot of people from older generations, they may say, no, for me, I'm living it. And I tell my kid, no, daddy lives this narrative. But your kid's not going to live it if you just tell. And so, this is why I want to talk about tonight, about this idea that we have what a scientist that I'm going to be using a lot, in addition to Allama Tabatabai, to explain what I'm going to be explaining the following nights. So a lot of what we're saying is Quran and Ahl Bayt, most of it. How are we, which commentary am I using to make the sense of the Ahadith and the Quran? Allama Tabatabai's commentary, most of it. So all the credit goes to him. If there's any mistake, it's my understanding, my shortcoming. But I'm also going to be using language to be able to convey what I want to say, right? And I'm using a lot of cognitive science borrowed from Professor John Vervaeke, and you'll see why. You'll see how it will help me to explain the Ahadith of Imam Ali better so that it sits in your heart. Okay, that's my goal, to be able to make sure this narrative, the religion we have, is not just something in our head, but something that comes to our heart so that we can live a better, meaningful life. So, one of the things that's happened, and it's called fundamental forgetting, is that knowledge, and unfortunately religion, has been reduced to prepositional knowing, prepositional knowledge. What do I mean by propositional knowledge? It says it's a kind of knowledge it's only a sentence, something you can